conversation about how video fits into the real-time feed. In particular, we were originally going to talk kind of more about just how it fits within Twitter and Facebook with kind of the more conventional platforms like Vine and Snapchat. We're probably going to kind of move over a little more into some of the live streaming app conversations, just because in the time since we wrote the description and now, that has become kind of a much more interesting conversation. I'm Eric Schwartz. I run the live streaming group at BitTorrent, which you probably didn't know existed. We do a live peer-to-peer streaming product. Long ago, I was the first person hired by Yahoo to do entertainment. And in between that, I ran a company called Phone Show, which was one of the first companies that kind of forced rich media into the Twitter feed. And at Phone Show, I met Dan Patterson down at the end there. And Dan's a journalist. Do you want to kind of give your intro?
So Eric and I met in the proto days of live streaming media. And that has been a theme that's run through my career. In fact, I started in broadcast radio and television in the late 90s and remember the very early days of podcasting and have seen these cycles come and go. And right now we're in the midst of a very interesting upswing. Eric's early apps were kind of, they saw the future of where we are now, and I've used these things at places like the United Nations, in Darfur, on presidential campaigns, and I've seen what works, what doesn't work, and particularly what audiences respond to.
Mike, want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Mike Berkeley, and I head up product at Viacom, supporting all of the Viacom brands, from MTV to Comedy Central to Nickelodeon. And our group is responsible for pretty much all of the digital products. So mobile apps, emerging platforms like Roku, Apple TV, the full video technology stack, as well as monetization. So all of the ads and reporting, audience analysis, and so forth, to growth and engagement features, and all of the content management systems and production workflow. So it's a fairly large scope. And the brands themselves also have product teams that are focused more on user experience and content programming. Prior to Viacom, I was vice president of product at Spotify. And prior to that, I headed up product for Comcast in their Silicon Valley Innovation Center. And prior to that, I had some startups that I founded and that I worked at in the online video space, dating back to the late 1990s.
Did you end up at Comcast via an acquisition?
It was not a true acquisition. It was, my last startup was unwinding, and the core team, myself and
say no more.
But yes, we had actually a great opportunity to move that core team over to Comcast, and that was part of the initial seed for their Silicon Valley office.
Cool. So kind of the idea of this conversation came out of the Facebook Q4 report. And in Q4, Facebook reported that they had done 3 billion video views. And I said to myself, what does that mean in Facebook? Because in Facebook, they're doing autoplay video. As I'm scrolling through, video starts playing. And if you have, I don't know, what do they have? I don't even know their monthly actives right now. But just assume it's 1 billion monthly actives. That's only 3 views per person. That actually seems low if you're doing autoplay. So what is kind of the definition of a play in a world that is feeding you video in kind of a chronological feed? So I think we need to kind of have a brief conversation about where measurement and metrics fits into this whole world. And later on, I found out that Facebook's definition of a video play is that you get 3 seconds. And that's their definition of a video play, which kind of leads you to the question of, is that monetizable? You can't really stick a pre-roll on that. You can't really do a brand play on a 3-second video. And as you kind of look cross-platform, if you have 4 or 5 different video platforms running on 2 or 3 different kind of meta platforms, so you have Twitter running with Periscope and Twitter video and a bunch of other stuff that they're doing, and you have Facebook running a bunch of different video platforms. Do we need some kind of commonality across these different platforms to to measure engagement? If you're going to try to sell ads against it, I think you kind of do.
I think for us, yeah, absolutely. But I don't think it's in Facebook's interest to have a common defined metric that is analogous to Snapchat, right? It also shows the value of Snapchat. The whole content is 3 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, you end up with this kind of friction between the platform owner and the content creator, where the platform owner wants their vanity metric. Facebook loves getting up there and said they do 3 billion views in Q3, and then they said they did 4 billion views or they did 3 billion views in Q4, and they did 4 billion views in Q1. But that's kind of a vanity metric, and it's not comparable across different platforms.
And if we're having a debate, I want to define the terms of the debate. I don't want you to,
right.
and I don't also want to tell you what those terms are.
Yeah, I think also we have to recognize that still today, most of these social platforms are viewed by media companies as marketing channels as opposed to monetization channels. And I think it's about reach and not about monetization primarily. That's changing now, I think. I think as these platforms mature and the content formats that the platforms define become sort of a new standard for storytelling, the whole thing changes.
Yeah, and this is, we're missing a panelist who's in traffic. This is where I would be asking Jesse about MCNs now, and how MCNs monetize this stuff and what kind of metrics an MCN kind of looks for. But he's not here yet, so we'll save that piece for later. I wanted to kind of dive a little into the live video streaming space. Periscope had an interesting few weeks, to kind of say the least. As I'm sure all of you heard, there were several live streams of the fight 2 weeks ago that kind of came out on Periscope, and Periscope kind of said we did all the Digital Millennium Copyright Act takedowns that they sent us. One can make an argument that DMCA takedowns in the case of live are really utterly meaningless. And one can also make the point that just doing DMCA is not really going to make the media companies happy. If a huge part of Twitter's business ends up being their relationship to television, if kind of the big debate point between Twitter and Facebook is Twitter is good for TV, TV needs to trust Twitter. And I think they may have hurt themselves on how much TV trusts Twitter 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's two sides to this. There's, I think, the reaction of we got to protect content at all costs, which is very important to for a media company. The reality is that I think there are not that many events that are going to attract the type of piracy maybe that we saw a couple weeks ago. I think there has to be the right ingredients, right? It has to be incredibly exclusive, and I think that boxing match was $100,
yep,
something like
that. So
very, very high cost of entry, relatively short duration, and
so lots of incentive.
Lots of incentive to do it, because what the end user actually has to sit through is pretty terrible.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you look at what the Periscope CEO said afterwards, I completely agree with all of his points, that this is not a platform that's designed for piracy, that the user experience of pirating off of a television, holding your phone up to a television to pirate a video is, terrible.
That actually raises a really interesting question, though, and that's what is the value proposition of something like Periscope to, I like how you put it earlier, a meta platform to a meta platform like Twitter. There are a couple of reasons that we would look at ordinarily, right? It boosts the brand equity, it makes us feature complete, it provides a tool set that we may need, developers may need. Something like Periscope, though, let me ask you guys a question. Put your hands up if you've heard of or used the tool Utters. Exactly. All right, same question.
Yeah.
Put your hand up
I've actually heard of it. Sorry.
if you've used the tool Quick. Exactly. Yeah. Right, one. So back in 2007, 8, and 9, Quick was huge, relatively huge. And what Quick
for something that ran on one N95 phone.
A Nokia N95 phone. So I used to go to the Security Council at the UN, and I would stream the stakeouts that would happen. And people were stoked. I mean, the like 18 people who gave a damn about this live streaming video thing. Did the same thing at the presidential conventions. Bill Clinton speaking. Huge incentive, right? This is a guy everybody wants to see. Maybe there's 40 people watching. Maybe, right? This is in 2007, 2008, a less sophisticated consumer base. We come back now offering the same value proposition. How many of you actually want to see a stakeout from some diplomat at the UN? Exactly. Maybe a couple of you want to see Bill Clinton. Maybe you want to see a fight. But the incentive to use this is pretty low, and the value that it adds a platform, I don't know if it's there.
Well, I mean, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll say for that use case, I agree. But I think actually Periscope is a game changer for Twitter for a couple of reasons. Well, I think the first one is that it's really the first time at scale there is actual real-time media in the so-called real-time feed.
Right, yeah, exactly,
right?
yeah.
So it's pretty interesting when you think about what that means, which is as a consumer, you're seeing the act of creation at exactly the same time that the creator is seeing it.
Yeah.
But do I want to see that?
Well, it depends what the subject matter is,
yeah,
right?
so
exactly.
So go back to your, so you're a reporter. So
Yeah.
Arab Spring. What if Periscope existed?
Well, there were live streaming things during that, and
But not
they were
at
still
scale.
pretty low.
Yeah, but they weren't at scale. And if it was built into Twitter at the time, and right now it's not. So I
think there's a higher. I think that that's an example of something that is exciting, but there's not actually that many people who want to watch a grainy video of somebody jostling around in a crowd.
But and we're getting to actually one of the other points is that, single camera live streaming, single camera video production live is pretty much the hardest thing you can do with a video camera. I mean, to make that good, yeah, sure, you can make it good, but you're going to run 15 rehearsals to get everybody in the right place at the right time. You're going to end up with a lot of backs of heads and feet, and there's a reason that CNN has a guy sitting there looking at 700 video streams down in Atlanta saying, that's the one that tells the story. Let's put that one up right now.
Right. I think all I'm saying is that you're right, but there may be more novelty value than there is actual consumer value in that live instant.
Right.
I am watching the moment of creation.
Right. Yeah. There could be. We'll see.
Yeah,
I think it's still early. We don't know yet what the use cases are.
And you're right. The Arab Spring, not at scale. Right now, the space is more mature. The consumer is more mature. It's a different era now.
But getting back to actually a point you were making, there is a bit of a dichotomy between live streaming and Twitter, because Twitter, while they say they're the real-time feed of the world, is actually not the real-time feed of the world. They're actually the very recent history of the world. Mm-hmm. And this is, in fact, real-time media. But the method of virality in Twitter is the retweet, and the retweet is a trailing indicator. So how does something really go viral when it has kind of a hard end? It ends here. And they're archiving it. I think they're archiving it for a day now.
I'm not sure.
But
yeah, I mean, this gets to the question of discovery.
Right.
And Twitter has made a lot of investments, obviously, in real-time trending topics. The same thing has to be applied to Periscope in order for it to be a consumer, like a real, interesting consumer tool. And I think the use case really is, at least I think, most likely it will be around events that are happening around the world in real time. And I think Twitter needs to provide the same technology to Periscope that it uses for tweets to like within 30 seconds understand something's happening at this point on the globe.
Sure.
And there's a trend. We're seeing, in the last 30 seconds, 200 people started streaming live from this point.
Yeah.
And of course, since it's on a phone, location data is built in.
Yeah, and that said, Jesse has arrived. Maybe we'll ask him the MCN question in a minute. That said, parsing the content of a plain text tweet is vastly easier than parsing the content of a live video shot over a phone. I mean, that's a hard, especially in real time.
Right. So if you could combine Vine
Yep.
and Periscope, you got it made. 7-second live clips.
Yeah, that would be really. Maybe I'm just too old at this point, but I'm not sure my short attention span would really work there.
I mean, the thing is.
Put your mic back on. Your mic is not on you.
Is it?
Oh, you dropped yourself.
Thank you.
Yep. Working? Good. Yeah, so parsing video takes a lot more brain power than parsing 140 characters. That's absolutely true. But I think part of it is like you have to use metadata in order for the consumer to make the decision of whether to watch or not.
Do you think Twitter or Meerkat or YouNow, I mean, there is YouNow, we'll talk about them in a second, because they're actually kicking both Periscope and Twitter, both Periscope and Meerkat's butts, and nobody talks about them. Do you think that eventually Periscope or Meerkat end up with a director? So you end up with kind of a meta Periscope of, look, there are 50 people doing Periscopes from Tahrir Square. I'm going to sit there and play the role of the guy sitting in Atlanta choosing feeds for CNN.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if that wasn't their intent in purchasing this, and I mean, it's Twitter, who the hell knows, but that's what you need. Robots. Like, the guys at BuzzFeed are really good at this. They use robots for 95% of the curation and then humans for the last 5%, right? And that's what I would do if I were Twitter. I would make sure that there's something compelling that hits those trending topics every second of the day. And I'd use a human to do it.
So how do you monetize live streaming?
It's a loss leader.
I bet Jesse has a different opinion than that.
I mean, I think that they're probably going to start doing some interactive overlays on top of the screen. You're already
Jesse, put your mic on, please.
Mic is on. I can hold it just like that. Does it sound much better? No? Put it back on there? All right. Where do you want it? All right. I think they're going to do, it's not catching me, is it? It is? Can you guys hear me? All right.
All right.
Good enough. Interactive overlays. So the same way when you're looking at Meerkat and you're looking at Periscope and they have the chat boxes that scroll up and the nice pretty little hearts that fly up, I think they're going to do some branded overlays that will slide up and down and you can probably click through. It's going to be horrible.
That's
programmatic.
Programmatic to what? I mean, if you're going to do the metadata tagging, you start targeting the tags, and you probably do programmatic. But
what about native? Could you do native?
Interrupting the stream? So basically,
No, in between two different streams.
yeah, you can totally do that.
Yeah.
But how many people now, when they get on Periscope, are going for one stream versus browsing and using Discovery? So I think there's going to be a disparity between the people using social natively to drive to one particular stream, whether you're scheduling something, versus Periscope becoming a community of discovery of live streams. There's going to be a total fragmentation of how the platform's going to be used.
What's driving Periscope consumption now has to be the push notification, right?
Totally.
As opposed to the discovery. I mean,
To a single stream.
Their discovery
Right.
experience is
like
barely exists.
yeah, unless somebody specifically tells you, go to this URL, you're not going to find something. You're only going to find it because it is the most popular thing. If you go to the front of the app, it doesn't really know a lot yet.
So they have branded content streams, literally getting brands and influencers to start doing streams.
Snapchat strategy?
That's pretty much Snapchat strategy.
But isn't the challenge with live that, especially UGC live, that it's so unpredictable?
Yeah.
What advertiser is going to put their brand up next to who knows what?
Right. I mean, you know the MCN world fairly well. When a brand does kind of a YouTube deal or a Vine deal, do they, approve the creative before it goes live?
It depends on the brand itself.
Okay.
So there are a lot of brands that will move pretty quickly and have a stable of influencers that they use all the time that understand the brand pillars or some of the legal issues. But there are brands that also have their lawyers wanting to go through and approve everything.
Do you guys know what a brand deal is? How kind of Vine and a lot of Facebook is monetized for the content creators yet? Could you give like a 2-second kind of definition of a brand deal?
Sure. So there's a couple different ways that brands are now advertising across the MCNs. The MCNs are no longer just YouTube. MCNs are now the multi-social platform networks that include, hopefully soon, Snapchat, if they'll actually start releasing some APIs so you can do some ad targeting. But Instagram and Facebook. And the way that they're doing deals is kind of twofold. One is obviously running pre-roll video, which is pretty typical across YouTube and on Facebook. The other is where a brand approaches somebody like Maker Studios or Machinima, and they're actually going to co-create content together. So a great example of that is Machinima actually did a show that was kind of like a Double Dragon. If you're, I think we're all pretty much the same age in this room, so you guys pretty much remember Double Dragon. Anyway, great video game, and they fused an episode of one of their popular shows with a Hyundai vehicle. The Hyundai vehicle essentially was sort of the pseudo star, as the talent basically did a Double Dragon battle in front of the car. So the brand didn't actually run any media before or after this video. The brand was integrated into the video, and the brand presence within the video was literally its advertising integration. So what they typically do will spend, let's say, $1 million. They'll hire Machinima to create this great video. Machinima will then push it out across its network of social platforms and the target audience that the brand wants to target, and they'll get the reach that Hyundai is really looking for. So that's pretty typical to how most of these deals are getting done now. Facebook, just a few weeks ago, announced their anthology program, which is working with 7 or 8 different MCNs to create content specifically for audience matching with brands. So Facebook will use their deep data and analytics to do psychographic matches of, hey, I'm a guy who's 39 years old, who lives in Westport, Connecticut, and I love Altoids. So essentially they'll get a brief, they'll go pitch an MCN like Tastemade to go do a great video. They'll go find 2 million guys just like me and women just like me, and then they'll actually target all of us with the great content they created around an Altoid brand. So this is what you're gonna see, I think, for the foreseeable future of brand integration into video content across social platforms in the MCNs.
So does that work with live?
I think it's tough. I mean, it's like sports is live, so you're going to get billboards in the background of the stadiums.
Yeah.
You're going to do, interruptive ads. There's no ad breaks in live. There could be some crafty people that start doing it that way. Mm-hmm. And literally, it's like you're up there doing your skit or whatever it is, and it's like commercial break, and then you do a commercial break.
How does Twitch do this on mobile?
How does Twitch do brand integration?
Yeah.
I'm actually not sure how they're doing brand integration because,
Not sure well, I mean,
or if they're doing any.
What is Twitch? It is just one big commercial.
Right. Yeah. Twitch is a commercial for video games,
right,
which is why Amazon bought them, not Google.
Right.
Because Amazon sells video games and Google only kind of sells everything.
I heard different reasons on why Google didn't complete that.
That's a different conversation that isn't happening with a microphone on. So if you think about the different kinds of platforms that are putting video into a real-time feed, clearly the people who are creating content for YouTube are creating a very different style of content than people who are creating content for Vine. How much? If you're a Viner, are you only a Viner? Are you, can you kind of go multi-platform? Is there a live play, or are we really going to end up with kind of Vine stars siloed from Periscope stars, siloed from YouTube stars, siloed from, whatever comes next?
I think so.
You think so? I don't.
I think that there's native Vine stars,
Sure. Yep.
right, who have used the 7-second storytelling format as a craft, and it's a form of art now.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And you can't that skill set of editing video doesn't really apply to these other platforms.
And I think Vine is a bit of an outlier
it
there,
is.
just because of the
But the
form.
skills of attracting customers or
Yes.
viewers, social, this was a far more strategic conversation 5 years ago, and now it's just tactics, right? Whatever your primary network is, you get very good at the tactics of that network. If it's Vine, it's 7-second videos. If it's YouTube, it's whatever. But you use all the other platforms to amplify what makes you good on one platform.
So the other platforms basically become your marketing tool for your
Yes.
primary platform where
Yeah.
you make your money?
And if you're really good, like a lot of the YouTube video game guys, what they found out is that I can use both platforms to bounce off of each other. I can use the asynchronous nature of YouTube to amplify the people on Twitch, which is a totally different audience, and drive traffic back to YouTube.
I think what's so cool though is that these platforms are bringing so much new energy into content creation. Even like in a big company like Viacom, it's this whole new world. And as I mentioned before, historically these platforms have been used as marketing channels, but I think that's starting to change. So Comedy Central is on Snapchat in Snapchat Discover. That's a whole new there's a whole new production workflow within Viacom now, specifically for Snapchat, and it's becoming a real thing. And I think assuming that this trend continues and that there's going to be more and more people consuming content, short form content that's bespoke to these platforms, it's going to really change the way we think about entertainment. And I kind of view the 30-minute, 60-minute episode within a series as a very mature format that will live on for a long time, but it's not going to be the only game in town. And I think there's going to be, over the next couple of years, so much more investment in original content with these new formats. So I think what we see today is going to be very different when we're talking about professional content than what we see next year in 2 years.
How aligned are the priorities of the content creator versus the priorities of the platform owner? and is that, how much of a problem is that going to be moving forward?
Well, I mean, if you think about what people are creating art for, there's the people that really love the art form.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then there's the platform provider, which is pretty much out for a bottom line dollar. So more than likely, they don't really give a crap about the art. They care about the audience that's attracted to the art, so they can then monetize that audience. So as a creator, we're very pro creator rights, because right now the creators are going through a massive flux in which they are pretty much the shiniest object in the room. Every network, every MCN, Newfronts last week, Upfronts this week, everyone was touting the talent that they have, whether it's talent on air or the social talent that they're getting. And it's all about how that talent brings the audience. At the end of the day, it's about the right audience and how you scale and monetize that audience. So the creators are kind of in the power seat right now to be able to drive terms. A lot of creators right now are signing deals and not really fully understanding the rights that they're giving away, because they don't either have the money to hire a lawyer, or they just don't care. All they want to do is create stuff. And so I think over the next couple of years, you're going to see a massive movement of pro-creator, rights changing in their favor, and the power actually being more to them than to the platform.
I think there's naivete also in that, and particularly with a lot of the young YouTube stars, is that they, look, if you're a musician, or in my case, a writer, or some type of other creative profession, there's a whole history, right? You have people, support organizations, professional organizations, that help you figure out what your rights are and how much to get paid and that kind of thing.
Yep.
And I know for a fact that there are a ton of YouTube stars that do millions of views that signed away all of their rights because they had no idea.
Agreed.
Completely naive. And just like you said, we'll see this maturation of the space. Yep. Those organizations will exist in the next 5 to 15 to 20 years, and that too will mature.
Yep.
So historically, media was always, or a lot of media was always about building an archive that you could then monetize forever. You know, we were both down at NAPTI. I don't know if you heard, you know, Norman Lear's talk down at NAPTI, but, you know, Norman Lear built a dozen of the most popular TV shows in the history of time, and, you know, people watch them to this day. Is there archival value in any of this stuff? Is there a long-term career? Are you going to like build up an archive that you can retire on in 15 years? Or is this all just an immediate grind? I'm doing this for the next deal. I'm doing this for the next deal.
No, I mean, I think if you look at somebody like Michelle Phan, she's been able to literally catapult herself through the industry, leverage, you know, what she's really good at, and dip into her archive and her catalog and her fan base to launch an empire. You know, like they literally, Endemol just launched Icon Network, which is a screen agnostic network that's driven by Michelle Phan and people that she's essentially bringing into this fold. And just like a television network, just like the cable studios, you know, when you go get HBO Go or HBO Now, they're marketing the deep catalog that's available there through their beautiful discovery engine. That's one of the biggest issues right now is social, is discovery sucks on social. Yeah. It's horrible. You go to YouTube.
Discovery sucks on Netflix
but
too.
It's even harder on YouTube and other social platforms to actually really go find a great archive of content and how you can go through linearly and go look at somebody's body of work. So I think that's going to change. There's going to be a lot of companies over the next couple of years that are going to help monetize old catalog content because, again, if it's tagged correctly and archived correctly, it can be relevant at almost any single time. And that it ties back to, as well as how certain celebrities are actually doing content on different platforms. A Vine video by Jerome Jarre with Twizzler integrated as the brand can be used as a pre-roll video across any social platform. That literally, you can tap into that years to come from now. So there's a couple different ways I think that we're going to see this start to emerge with real programming of these catalogs.
It seems that the cultural relevancy is still super important, though.
Yeah.
And that's what pushes sort of the time component or the window in which a piece of content is really viable at scale. So I don't think that's going to change. And you see that with movies, you see that with TV shows. Yes, people still do go watch The Wire, but they do so because they feel like they need to catch up to where the culture is today, right? You know, all of their friends.
That's exactly it. I think that there's something that it is really difficult to measure, but I think, I keep bringing up Snapchat, but there's a ton of other companies like this that have stumbled onto the value of the ephemeral, not having I don't know a better way to put this, but the psychic weight or cost of I have HBO Now. Well, I better go watch The Wire, and then I better watch Curb Your Enthusiasm, then I better get through all these cultural touchstones just so that I am contemporary. Or, the hell with it, I just want a 8-second Comedy Central video on Snapchat, and then I'm done, and I don't have to have the weight of cultural expectation.
My 13-year-old, you know, queues up a bunch of Vines on her iPad and, you know, just watches a bunch of Vines, and that's TV to her.
Right.
In a lot of
There's no
ways.
psychic baggage with that.
Is it always going to be that way? Because I think nostalgia does play in a way that a lot of people consume media. There's a great article, I think it was in the New York Times last week, about the fact that by the age of 33, the music that you're going to listen to after 33, only 5% or less than 5% is going to be new music.
I saw this. Yeah.
Like, that means that you're dipping into back catalog and nostalgia because you love a certain thing. Your brain is kicked into certain musical, you know, data that's attracting you to it. You know, when the millennials get to the next phase and they're 35, are they going to be going?
Are they going to be watching? Are they going to be watching? You know, 20-year-old Vines when they're 40?
Right. So it's going to be so interesting to see how this whole movement matures and
Yeah.
evolves.
Totally. I think there's a big difference between music and video, though.
Yeah,
because music is, you know, it's such a part of who you are and who you've been, and I don't know if that's true. Like, so Top Gun was my favorite movie when I was in 8th grade, right?
Because you were a goose?
What's that?
Maverick? Which one were you?
Am I gonna like?
He's not answering that.
No, I'm not gonna answer that. But am I gonna watch the whole movie again to reflect on my? Well, probably not, because my 7th grade was a horrible year of my life. But if it were a good year, like, I don't know. I don't think we use video in the same way that we use music.
I don't know. I mean, I find myself dipping back and going to see great movies again. You know, The Godfather, and there's
MASH.
Spinal Tap and MASH, and like, I mean, you see it now with syndication of television. Like Friends is running all over the God's green earth right now.
Yeah.
Seinfeld, the value of that?
Yeah, you know, how many billions of dollars, you know, did he make just from the syndication to 170 different countries? And think about the fact that if Pepsi integrated into an actual episode, it's now gotten 30 years of relevancy and reach by being a brand that's been around for 30 plus years.
Yeah.
So if you're watching an episode, you see that Pepsi can on the counter, whoever did that integration 30 years ago is a fucking genius.
Yeah,
right now.
they got the best deal in the history of media. You know, those
Seriously.
cereal guys really did well.
Yeah.
We got about 10 minutes left. I want to kind of open this up to questions. Yeah.
So Jesse, you were talking about archiving right now. I wonder, so if I'm consuming a lot of this current content on my mobile device, platforms like that, you see it becoming a lean back experience potentially in the archive mode? Like, do you believe that I would watch a Vine on my Samsung TV one day, 10 years from now? I'm just saying,
Yeah.
because if the audience is trained today to watch on mobile and mobile keeps exploding for this element of content, or do you just see it that mobile becomes the way we consume for this forever?
I think,
I don't know if
yeah.
I see it lean back.
I see mobile as the ultimate discovery engine, quite honestly, and I think there's going to be a lot of new technologies, and you're seeing it with AirPlay, with Chromecast, where you can cast directly from your mobile device to the big screen. So if you find a piece of content that's worth it, you basically say, cool, you know, I watched the 6-second Vine, I'm tied into it right now, and oh yeah, by the way, this is a 6-second tease for a 20-minute piece of content. I want to cast that right up to my TV right now and sit back and watch the video.
Also to point out, YouTube has now added autoplay of the next thing in line. And so that's kind of, God knows Google has the data. So that would suggest that at least Google's data is showing that there is at least some desire of a lean back experience on that stuff.
And who knows what, you know, the different experiences are going to be in 5 years, right? So with Oculus Rift, if that takes root, then the question is, are we going to re-encode the trillions of 7-second Vine videos into virtual reality, right? So that you can experience it.
Yeah, okay.
You know, speaking of that, not to rabbit hole us too much, but speaking of integrated brand content, I think it's is it Scripps who runs? It's either Scripps or one of the large newspaper syndicates worked with the Des Moines Register to create video in VR that is entirely a brand integration. But I'm just a video of a farm, a typical farmer in Iowa walking around my farm. But it's VR and it's super cool and it's entirely brand integration.
You had a question there?
Yeah, just when we talk about creators here, is the measure of success for most creators going to be smaller scale than maybe things were 15, 20 years ago? Because yeah, your superstars are going to hit God knows what. Most of these people are going to make a little money and then.
Yes.
Yes.
As a content creator, absolutely. And you have to grind for your dollars.
But their
15
costs
years
are lower
ago, there was
too.
no opportunity.
That's true.
Yeah, 50 years ago, there were 4 channels to watch video content, and they were all pulling 25, 30 million people each channel every single night. So I think part of what's happening, too, is the fragmentation of audience targeting. So all these media agencies are getting very savvy about finding the exact targeted audience they want to target and pinpointing directly to the right creators that are hitting that audience. So there might be a creator that has 7 million followers on YouTube, but they only have 50,000 followers of that exact audience a brand is looking for. And there might be somebody that has 100,000 followers, but 100,000 of the exact target. The brands are getting smarter and saying, we want to attract ourselves to 10 of those 100,000 followers because they're cheaper and they're going to work harder for our dollars. They're going to be more efficient to get to our exact audience.
And you actually kind of saw a lot of that in kind of the 500 channel version of traditional cable TV too, where you had, not the farming channel per se, but craft channels and car channels and stuff like that. You had a question?
Yeah, well, just with that last question, a lot of these new formats are short, quick, high energy. Do you see that continuing, or is there going to reach a saturation point where people are like, I really just, it's too much, and there's going to be blowback, or do other content creators need to start adjusting and thinking in that smaller chunk?
I don't think it matters.
Not only matters.
I think, if there's some blowback, people will make longer content. And people already are, especially kind of in audio. I mean, Dan can kind of speak to the podcasting world of this, but You know, there's a lot of hour-long podcasts that are getting created now and consumed. And since you're no longer on a clock, since you're no longer on a broadcast schedule, I don't think it matters.
Fragmentation. I think that's the key. Fragmentation and niche. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think there's also something to be said about the TED format, the 18-minute format. You know, they put a lot of time and energy into how and why they picked 18 minutes. So, you know, the half-hour comedy, only 22 minutes. I think that's, you know, a lot of people are taking in consideration attention span, especially when you're looking at the longer format stuff.
I think in the next couple of years, we're going to see, similar to what Serial did for podcasting, there's going to be a short-form serialized show, maybe with 5-minute daily episodes. And I'm not saying this because I have any inside knowledge from Viacom. This is not about Viacom. But I think it's going to be sort of a natural progression that someone's going to create a very, very polished, very professionally produced daily series, 5-minute episodes that's going to completely take off, and that's going to be the spark that lights a whole new genre.
Yeah, and to a certain extent, you actually start to see this in traditional television right now, just with the fixed arc storytelling of like True Detective on HBO and you know, Fargo on I guess FX, yeah, Fargo on FX. You know, they know, you know, it's kind of like a different version of the miniseries from the 70s, and I absolutely agree that you are going to see those. There's so much less risk for the content creator than just an open-ended, I'm going to be doing this show for, you know, 14 seasons or something like that. And they're like, I'm going to do 10 episodes. And, you know, maybe those 10 episodes are 7 minutes long, or maybe they're an hour long.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing, I mean, that's what Grace Helbig did. She literally did daily 5 to 8 minute shows on YouTube, engaged her audience. It was reliable. People came there every single day expecting her to be there, asking her questions. She just shot it literally in her bathroom and in her living room in her apartment in the city. But then she transitioned over to her show on E, and it's not doing so well because she now has to fill 30 minutes of time, and her personality on the big screen doesn't translate the same way it does with the intimacy of what she's doing on YouTube with her fan base.
Felicia Day is a good example
Felicia
of that.
Day, totally.
Yeah. I think we have time for one more question. Go ahead up front.
So just combining some of the ideas you guys are talking about here, there's a middle sort of live event that's, you know, sort of a planned, the event style, planned live, where you can get a brand to sponsor. You do know it's going to come up. And talking about you were saying about there's 4 channels 40 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, there are these niche communities where people are following and seeing the same thing. And do you see a future where, you know, there are these virtual channels of communities and they're being fed events and people sort of discover through their own communities branded events, you know, with a
Absolutely.
channel?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
totally. Yeah.
I mean, I think you're going to see a ton of that stuff in, you know, starting in areas like music festivals. You know, basically just ephemeral channels that are going to be there for, you know, a week or a day.
There's some really cool stuff. NBC just announced Dateable, which is a live, actually shot live sitcom, 30-minute sitcom. That got picked up for the 3rd season. SNL is talking about, you know, in the next seasons how they're going to really shoot like super live.
Everything old is new again.
Yeah, it's kind of insane. But there's also some great stuff when these social video platforms start building their channels out, which they don't really have right now. There's a company I'm familiar with at Techstars called Spoon University. It's 2,500 students across all these different universities in the US shooting live video of them cooking stuff in their dorm room, in whatever it is. It's literally a food network for millennials shot with live video and instructionals on how to you know, create the best, I don't know, panini, you know, with whatever.
But they were called soap operas in the day for a reason.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
it's all coming around again. You know, some of the same models that, you know, were the birth of television are re-emerging in the kind of rebirth of television online.
Absolutely. Yeah, you put these things on, you know, on a tripod, and you're shooting in HD, and you start casting it in HD when, you know, the networks, you know, hopefully, you know, get to super LTE.
Yeah.
I think we're going to start seeing some really cool stuff happening.
I think we're out of time. We had till 12:30, and it is. So thanks for coming, and if you have any questions for any of us, follow up with us afterwards. Thanks.